Green is famous for its mana ramp, especially in Commander, where the slower format allows green to ramp for several turns and then play some huge threats. As the only color to get unconditional land ramp in the game, this gives green a huge advantage in the format. Considering this, it's only natural to ask what the best green ramp spells are in Commander, and that's what we're going to answer here today. Starting things off at number 10, we have Splendid Reclamation. This is a sorcery with a mana cost of 3 and 1 green. It has the effect where you return all the land cards in your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Reclamation has an incredibly high upside for such a cheap ramp spell, with its only issue being that it requires a bit of setup. Lands won't be going to your graveyard without you putting them there. Luckily, there are a ton of decks that can do exactly that. There are a lot of decks based around the graveyard and milling themselves, such as Mul Daya, the Gravetide, and the like. Players will pretty regularly use cards like Grizzly Salvage and Satyr Wayfinder to mill cards to take advantage of them later, not to mention commanders that will mill their controller. This means that in any graveyard-focused deck, you can usually find a way to make Reclamation an incredibly powerful ramp spell. Even outside of these more broad applications, Reclamation's power is boosted further by a plethora of decks that revolve around putting land cards specifically into their graveyard. Commanders like Lord Windgrace and the Gitrog monster both love putting lands into the graveyard, whether from the field or directly from their library. Their focus on land synergies in particular also means that they're more likely to be taking advantage of landfall synergies, which makes mass land ramp even more advantageous for these decks. And while yes, Escape Shift is generally the best card for landfall synergies specifically, it can't really pull double duty as a ramp spell. Reclamation's main weakness is that you do need to be building your deck around its effect at some level to really consider playing it. While it is good with the ever so common fetch lands, you can't rely on these alone to put enough lands into the graveyard for Reclamation to compete with your other ramp options. Even graveyard-focused decks may not want Reclamation if they're not extremely mill-focused. For example, many builds of Marin of Clan Nel Toth are more focused on looping a couple of creatures in and out of the graveyard and don't need that many mill effects to work, so will often not have enough lands to bring back with Reclamation. All of this gives Reclamation a very powerful but small niche in the format. That niche is even smaller though, because there are a few other cards with very similar effects to Reclamation. World Shaper and Aftermath Analyst are both creatures that mill cards and have access to Reclamation's effect in some way, though it does require them to die somehow or another. The fact that these cards mill you on their own gives them uses that Reclamation doesn't have. Though Reclamation taking less effort to get the land reanimation effect means it's not outclassed by them entirely. Reclamation is incredibly powerful, but unlike most of the other cards in this list, it's not something you'd play in every green deck. You do need to be in a specific deck for it, so it has to be pretty low on this list overall, despite how strong it can be. And at number 9, we have Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. This is a 2/3 legendary elf scout with a mana cost of 1 and 2 green. Whenever another creature enters, if it has the highest power of all creatures, its controller can draw a card. You can also pay 1 green and tap Selvala to add X mana in any combination of colors, where X is the greatest power amongst all the creatures you control. So, if you have a 5-power creature, Selvala's ability makes 5 mana. While Selvala is known for being a powerful commander, she is also great in the average green deck. Green is all about ramping a ton and putting huge creatures into play, meaning Selvala is almost always tapping for 4 or more mana. Even at this pretty medium case, Selvala is an amazing card. It's an incredible amount of mana to get for such a low cost, and if you build your deck around it at all, it's also a good source of card draw. Green decks not only have a lot of big creatures, they have cards like Alta Primal Hunger that are just way easier to cast than their stats alone would imply. This is made even better by the number of cards in green that already care about the power of your creatures. Cards like Soul's Majesty and the Great Henge also have effects based on the power of your creatures, which further encourages green players to go as tall as they can. This often means that Selvala can be nearly doubling your mana on any given turn, sometimes making upwards of 10 mana. This is only made better by the fact that there are tons of ways to untap Selvala and use her ability again. An easy example is Staff of Domination, which can be used to untap a creature several times in a single turn. If you have a 4-power creature on board, you can make infinite mana with Staff, which you can then use to draw your entire deck and win on the spot. Even if you're not going infinite, cards like Wirewood Symbiote pair with it extremely well. While we're here, we should also mention the card Traverse the Outlands. This is a sorcery for 5 mana that searches your library for X basic lands, where X is the greatest power amongst creatures you control, and puts them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Traverse is very playable in the same decks as Selvala, but it's a lot less splashable. If you're only ramping out 4 or so basics, it's probably just not worth it when compared to other ramp options. However, the payoff of getting effectively every basic land out of your deck with a higher power commander is hard to ignore. Selvala requires a bit of deck building, but essentially any creature-based deck can at least slot her in and profit, so it's definitely worth keeping her in mind when deck building. And at number 8, we have Skyshroud Claim. This is a sorcery, the mana cost of 3 and 1 green. It has the effect where you search your library for 2 forest cards, put them onto the field, and then shuffle. There are a ton of cards like this. Essentially different versions of explosive vegetation, with slightly different upsides and downsides. Claim has one of the best upsides that any of these cards has been given, namely that it puts the cards onto the field untapped. This means that while it does cost a full 4 mana to cast, you get 2 of that mana back right away. This makes it a lot easier to weave Skyshroud Claim into your plays in the later turns of a game. The only downside of this card is that it's limited in what it can grab by only being able to fight forests. But this is essentially secretly an upside of the card over other 4 mana ramp spells. You see, there are a ton of useful forests in Magic, and because Skyshroud Claim doesn't say any basic forests, you can grab any land with the forest typing. This allows you to find a ton of different dual and even tri-lands off of Claim, such as the Shocklands, meaning that even a single claim not only ramps you, but usually fixes your mana for the rest of the game as well. The only downside of Claim is that it does come down pretty late, as 4 mana is usually a lot for a ramp spell. You really want at least one other cheaper ramp spell to play before it to allow you to cast Claim on turn 3 instead of 4, which isn't a huge ask, but this means you have to play a lot fewer 4 mana ramp spells than 2 mana ramp spells in general. This doesn't necessarily make the card worse, but it means that it has more stiff competition. Still, Claim is generally on top of the pile for 4 mana green ramp spells. The runner-up would be Migration Path, which ramps out 2 basics and has cycling for 2, letting you discard it for a better card in the late game. While cycling is a nice upside, Claim is generally a lot better just thanks to the flexibility it has whenever you cast the card. And at number 4, we have Archdruid's Charm. This is an instant with a mana cost of 3 green. It has the effect where you choose one. You search your library for a creature or land, reveal it, and if it was a land, put it onto the field tap. Otherwise, you put it into your hand, then shuffle. You can also put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, then have that creature deal damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Finally, the last mode exiles an artifact or an enchantment. Archdruid Charm is an incredibly versatile card, combining 3 quite good effects into a great package. We mainly care about the first mode here, but it's worth mentioning that not only are the other 2 modes great, but the ability to tutor up specific creatures like Craterhoof Behemoth to close the game is a massive upside of Archdruid's Charm over the other ramp spells. However, even without these other modes, you might still consider playing Archdruid's Charm just for its ability to ramp out any land in the game. There are very few cards that do this, and Archdruid is the only one that costs this little mana. This is really important because there are a lot of broken lands legal in Commander, like Gaia's Cradle, which can be tapped to add 1 green mana for each creature you control, or Cabal Coffers, which lets you pay 2 and tap it to add 1 black mana for each swamp you control, or even Field of the Dead, which essentially just says landfall, make a 2/2 black zombie. Archdruid's Charm not only gives you access to these powerful lands at any time, it also has 2 other modes and can tutor up creatures for you. The main downside of the card is, of course, its mana cost. Triple green is difficult for some decks to make, so 5-colored decks, for example, may need to skip out on it. In that case, your best options are Hour of Promise and Tempt with Discovery. Hour is a sorcery for 4 and 1 green that ramps out 2 lands from your library, tapped, and also makes zombies if you have some deserts, but no one really cares about that part. Tempt with Discovery is a 4 mana sorcery that ramps out a single land for you, then lets each opponent ramp out a land as well. For each opponent who does, you ramp out another land. Of these cards, Tempt is probably the worst. Most players are smart enough to say no to the offer, which will make Tempt a really bad ramp spell. You could use it if you're okay with only ramping out 1 land, But in that case, not only is Archdruid's Charm much better if you cast it, but Tempt is also probably worse than Expedition Map and the like. Our Promise is the more interesting card, as being able to tutor out 2 lands at once makes it great for certain combos. This can let you get Cabal Coffers and Urbok Tomb of Yawgmoth to enable with 1 card, or even Dark Depths and Thespian Stage if you want to meme around. While Our Promise is incredible for finding land combos, Archdruid's Charm is the more flexible card with this effect by a mile. You'll definitely want to play Charm over it, or even play both together. And at number 6, we have Burgeoning. This is an enchantment with a mana cost of 1 green. It is the ability where, whenever an opponent plays a land, you put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. Burgeoning is as powerful as it is swingy. Most people remember Burgeoning for games where someone opens it in their starting hand going first and plays it on turn 1, then plays an extra land on each of their 3 opponents' turns, starting their second turn with 4 lands in play. This is exactly as crazy as it sounds, but Burgeoning does have a couple of downsides that make it far more fair than it may seem. The first is that you do need lands in hand for the card to work. In those games where a player opens Burgeoning and gets crazy far ahead, they usually run out of lands to play after a single turn cycle, and the value train stops sooner than you might think. So the card is less a constant stream of free lands, and more like a way of getting the lands you already have into play faster. The second downside is that it does need your opponent to play lands to do anything. If you open Burgeoning, this isn't an issue, but later in the game, the card might not do as much as you want it to. Eventually, players may just not have any lands to play out if they haven't been drawing too many cards. If your opponents aren't jamming tons of card draw spells, it will slow down in the late game. Now, we may have spent most of this segment explaining the downsides of Burgeoning, but that doesn't negate how strong the card is when you do draw it early and have lands to play with it. What it does mean is that sometimes you'd rather use one of the many cards similar to Burgeoning over Burgeoning itself. For example, there's always a bit of debate about whether you should be playing Burgeoning or Exploration. This enchantment has the exact same mana cost and lets you play an extra land every turn. While it's not as crazy if you start the game with it, Exploration is more consistent than Burgeoning could ever be. You don't have to wait for your opponent to play lands to get your ramp, which means if you're a landfall focused deck, Exploration is a lot more likely to let you execute your game plan. Exploration isn't the only card that lets you play extra lands either. The most notable cards that share this ability are Azuza, Lost But Seeking, and Dryad of the Illysian Grove. Azuza is a 3-mana creature that lets you play 2 extra lands every turn, and Dryad is another 3-mana creature that lets you play 1 extra land a turn, but also gives all of your lands all basic land types. Azuza is amazing for landfall decks, letting you do things like loop bounce lands over and over for more landfall triggers. Dryad may be less ramp, but fixing your mana permanently is a really nice upside. Even better, this does synergize with certain effects, like Cabal Coffers as we mentioned earlier. While Burgeoning is the best in a random deck, cards like Exploration and Azuza are irreplaceable in the right situations, so it's hard to simply put one over all the others. And at number 5, we have Oracle of Mul Daya. This is a 2/2 Elf Shaman with a mana cost of 3 and 1 green. It is the abilities where you play with the top card of your library revealed, you can play lands from the top of your library, and you can play an extra land every turn. Oracle's abilities are extremely powerful, in large part thanks to being a form of card advantage and ramp on a single card. You see, if you play a land from the top of your library, you're getting access to a card that you normally wouldn't have, as well as clearing it out of the way so that you can draw whatever is under it more easily. The best case scenario, of course, is playing Oracle, playing 2 lands off the top of your library, then the top card of your deck now being a spell that you'll get to draw next turn. The amount of pure value Oracle gives you makes it one of the most splashable ramp spells in green. Almost every deck can slot Oracle in and it will improve their deck. However, Oracle is extremely good with particular synergies. It's great in all the same decks as the cards in the last section. Any deck that plays Exploration or Azuza probably also wants to slot in Oracle. And in fact, this makes Oracle even more crazy. Being able to play more lands every turn means you can play even more lands from the top of your library, meaning you can draw even more cards with your Oracle. The real power of Oracle, though, is that you don't really need any of these effects to make it good. Again, it's one of the most splashable ramp cards on this list so far, requiring very little help to be a best-in-class card. It's worth pointing out that for a time, Oracle was once criminally hard to get hold of. This led to a lot of players playing Courser of Crewfix as a replacement, despite Courser not even being a ramp spell because playing lamps from the top of your library is simply that good. This alone is a pretty good testament to the raw power of Oracle. It's famously one of the best ramp spells in the format, and for good reason. And at number 4, we have Cultivate. This is a sorcery with the mana cost of 2 and 1 green. It is the effect to ramp a basic land out of your deck, and lets you grab a basic and put it into your hand at the same time. It's worth mentioning the card Kodama's Reach as well, which is exactly the same, but it has the arcane tag, which doesn't really matter. Honestly, what it mostly means is that you can run 2 versions of this card in your deck. Cultivate and Reach are famous ramp spells for the format, thanks to being one of the best straight up ramp spells you can cast. While they only ramp 1 land into play, grabbing a basic from your deck at the same time is surprisingly useful. You see, every time you miss a land drop in a game, you're basically de-ramping yourself. Cards like Rampant Growth are 1-for-1s in terms of cards. They don't get you access to more lands, they just let you get the lands into play faster. If you miss a land drop, all of the mana you use on ramping essentially goes to waste. You end up in the same spot, but having spent mana that didn't affect the board. You do get the turns where you have extra mana before you miss the land drop, and in the super late game, this won't matter that much. But missing a land drop in the mid game can be pretty devastating. Cultivate and Reach ensure the worst case scenario never happens. You will ramp to 4 mana on turn 3, and then always hit your 5th land drop on the following turn, ensuring you hit 5 mana no matter what. This extra consistency makes playing Cultivate or Reach absolutely worth it, despite their higher costs. Now, while this is all true, you can't replace your 2 mana ramp with Cultivates. Getting to ramp on turn 2 and then playing a more expansive ramp spell on turn 3 is just too strong to ignore. You often have to play Cultivate in addition to 2 mana ramp spells, which doesn't make the card bad or anything, but it does hold it back from being any higher on this list. And at number 3, we have Birds of Paradise. This is a 0/1 bird with a mana cost of 1 green. It has flying and the ability where you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Honestly, this spot is more dedicated to the concept of mana dorks in general, because there are so many of them and they're so varied in what they do that every deck is going to choose a different set of dorks to play. There's also the fact that mana dorks are generally worse than land ramp in commander decks thanks to the presence of board wipes. This means that, eventually, your mana dorks will be swept away and you'll lose all of that mana. This makes most players shy away from them, but that's often a mistake. While they will die eventually, they're generally some of the most efficient ramp spells in the entire game. Birds of Paradise is a great example of this. There's not a single other card that makes 1 mana of any color for only 1 mana. Outside of absolutely broken cards like Moxen. This is one of the few ways to play a card like Cultivate on turn 2, which can be incredibly powerful. Generally, as long as your mana dork is making enough mana and having a big enough impact on the game before it gets removed, it's still worth playing. This is why, despite also being easy to remove, no one really complains about Selvala and Oracle of Mul Daya, because the impact they have on the game over just a couple of turns is worth it even if they eat a removal spell right away. Whether or not you want a card like Bird does depend on your deck, but any deck that has a 3 mana commander, playing 1 mana dorks is extremely good, and most decks will still want to pack a few just to play their commander on turn 2. There are a ton of other mana dorks that also fulfill very powerful roles in different decks, not just Birds, which is great for 3 mana commanders. Bloom Tender taps to add 1 mana of each color as long as you have a permanent of that color. So, if you have a green and a red permanent, it taps for green and red. And if you have something like Niv-Mizzet Reborn out, then it taps for 1 mana of each color. This has made Bloom Tender something of a staple for 4 and 5 mana color decks, where it's an insane piece of ramp that goes infinite really easily with cards like Freed from the Real. There are also a lot of dorks like Arbor Elf, which can untap Force, which pairs very well with mana doublers. Sanctum Weaver and Priest of Titania both add mana based on the number of cards of a certain type you have, letting them add a massive amount of mana, and Incubation Druid taps for 3 mana as long as it has a +1/+1 counter, which makes it a great ramp spell for counter decks. Overall, while you don't want to fill your deck with mana dorks, every strategy will have a mana dork or 2 that fits right at home with what they want to do, and will be worth playing. You'll rely on land ramp for most of your mana, but a dork here and there is simply too powerful to ignore. And at number 2, we have Carpet of Flowers. This is an enchantment with a mana cost of 1 green. It is ability where, once per turn at the start of one of your main phases, you target an opponent. Then you choose a color. For each island the player controls, you add 1 mana of the chosen color. This is the list's main shout out to more competitive commander, though honestly it's worth playing in casual circles as well. The amount of mana Carpet adds is kind of crazy for only 1 mana. If an opponent plays an island every turn, it's literally the most efficient ramp spell in the game. This isn't likely, of course, as players usually play multicolored decks and at least some of their lands won't be islands. Even with that said, you only need Carpet to be adding 2 mana a turn for it to be way above rate, and most blue decks will have at least 2 islands in play pretty early in the game. From that point forward, Carpet will be one of, if not the best ramp spell you have available. There is one other downside of Carpet though, and that's that if none of your opponents are playing blue, the card literally doesn't do anything. There are definitely tables where everyone is on Edgar Markov, or some beatdown deck and Carpet is a dead card, but in most Commander games, every color is being reported by at least 1 player. The vast majority of the time, Carpet will have at least 1 player it can target and make you mana. As long as you're willing to bite the bullet of it not working in some games, Carpet is absolutely worth playing. This is even more true in CEDH, where the card is very common to see. Blue is a very common color at higher power level tables, thanks to access to counter magic, which is very important in more combo heavy environments. This isn't a huge consideration for this list, as this is more casually focused. Still, it's so powerful that you should play it in the vast majority of green decks, even with the risk of it being blank in certain situations. And at number 1, we have Farseek. This is a sorcery the mana cost of 1 and 1 green. It is the effect where you ramp out a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card from your deck tapped. Here we have the holy grail of green ramp spells, the 2 mana land ramp card. This is the bread and butter of green ramp, being the cheapest way to permanently get ahead on mana. Farseek is the best 2 mana ramp spell in terms of mana fixing. While cards like Rampant Growth can get any basic, Farseek doesn't say non-basic, so you can do the same trick as the Skyshroud Claim and get dual lands with a land type, letting you get basically any combination of colors off of a single Farseek. This makes Farseek the best 2 mana ramp spell for multicolored decks, but it's worth noting that 3 visits and Nature's Lore give it a run for its money, and are much better in mono green decks for what should be obvious reasons. These 2 mana sorceries ramp a forest directly into play, untapped. Essentially, they're half a Skyshroud Claim, so they have all the same upsides and tricks there. Being playable on turn 2 makes them far better though, because they can let you do things like play your claim on turn 3 after ramping on turn 2. Getting 1 mana back after casting them also makes them far better in the mid or late game, as they effectively only cost you a single mana to cast. There's yet another 2 mana ramp spell we need to mention though, and that's Sakura-Tribe Elder. This is a 2 mana 1/1 that you can sacrifice to ramp out a basic land tapped. This is a rampant growth variant that works well with creature-based synergies. For example, you can bring it back with Marin of Clan Nel Toth to get a ramp spell turn after turn, or use it to draw extra cards off of effects like Grim Horus effects. Farseek is getting the nod here for being the best in multicolor decks. Now, all of these cards are more or less useful with certain combinations of cards, but often you won't even need to pick between them because most decks will be running more than 1 2 mana ramp spells anyway. When every single green deck is running more than 1 copy of a card, it's pretty obvious what the best green ramp spell is.